Hello, everybody. It's Bjorn with TraVek, General Manager, and you are listening to the Before the Hammer Strikes podcast. Today, I've got an awesome guest with us, Derek, who is the process fixer. Derek, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for saying I'm awesome, because then that really sets the bar very, very high. I have to bring my A game to this.
Well, I figure if I set the bar high, you'll live up to it, so that works.
That's great. Well, thanks for having me. This is fun.
You bet. Tell our audience a little bit about you.
Sure.
I mean, you've got a deep history of experience and all of these things.
Yeah.
But maybe start from the beginning. Share with us who you are.
I was born in 1973. No, I have been in business. Really, I started my first business when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
I was in the landscaping business, and I ended up acquiring another landscaping business.
So wait a minute. Let's just pause
really
right there.
wild.
Before we even
wild,
get going,
yes.
let's pause there. You're
Very
a 13-year-old.
Right? Yeah.
And then you use the word you acquired another landscape.
I did.
business.
It's a wild
Help me
story.
understand
Well,
that.
what happened was he was my neighbor. And from the time I was about 11 or 12, I was helping him clean equipment, sharpen blades, do those kind of things. And then I started going out on the route with him when I was 13. And he was older, and there were certain customers he complained about. And I was like, hey, I'll tell you what. How about I'll take that customer on and I'll pay you a percentage for the next 2 years.
Interesting.
And so he liked that idea, and he just kept giving me more and more customers. The challenge being 13 and trying to start a business is I don't have a truck.
Right.
So my mom in her Delta 88 1979 Oldsmobile, we used to get all the gear into there. She would drop us off, and I would estimate like this is going to take 2-3 hours. She would go do her shopping and things, come back and pick us up. And then when I was 15, I started recruiting high school football players. I played football, and I was like, anybody on the team have a pickup truck? You got a job. Right? Because if they've got a pickup truck, they can then operate it.
Makes things a little easier.
Yeah, it does. I mean, this is like, I didn't know about taxes. I didn't know about, IRS,
Sure.
Please don't come for me now. But I mean, this was, we built this business up. We started doing snow plowing, started doing some other kind of things. So I was very entrepreneurial from a very young age. And then worked in sales for a bit, and then I got a job doing a turnaround for a car dealership, and that really made me start to understand that I was really good at process.
Sure.
I was good at seeing patterns.
Turnaround meaning this business was struggling.
Yeah.
And you came in to help them to turn that business around to be profitable.
It was a weird story. It was I got a job. I did not go to college.
Okay.
So I was running a landscaping business. So I'm like, I'm doing just fine. I'm 23, 24 years old. I got 5 or 6 guys, we're driving
And
around.
did you run that from 13 to 23, 24?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So, and I enjoyed doing it. And then I realized that I needed to broaden out into sales. I grew up in the northern part of the Appalachian Mountains in central Pennsylvania, in a little town called Johnstown, very, very impoverished place, and also has really terrible weather, like a lot.
Okay.
20% more precipitation than Seattle, Washington.
Jeez.
So it's on the backside of the Appalachians. It's either snows or rains almost every day.
Wow.
So you find yourself every week, not like Arizona, where you can be like, well, we'll be there next Tuesday. You don't know. So we're constantly balancing this out. And I realized that at some point I realized I'm like, this is not a career.
Sure.
I need to learn something else. So I decided to learn sales. So I got a job at a car dealership, really small, little used car dealership. And after about a month, I found out they were going out of business.
Okay.
And I challenged the owner, just being a cocky 23-year-old kid. Sure. I was like, if you can't figure this out, you shouldn't let me do it. And he was like, he was already checked out. He's like, we got 4 months left on the lease. Go ahead.
Wow.
I'm losing money anyways.
Okay.
And turned it around and really, I replaced some of the people. I brought in some of my friends, and we really ran this thing and did really well with it and did that for a few years. And then I eventually ended up moving to Arizona after I met my wife, and just found other entrepreneurs that had that same set of problems. Sure. That were like, look, I'm frustrated with it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to fix it. And I just started jumping in on those kind of businesses. And
hence the process fixer.
Hence the process fixer. So I got fortunate that one of these companies, when I first moved to Arizona, was a little logistics company. I came in as a sales rep. They got really frustrated. They were part of a franchise organization, so I understood. Okay. I had read enough about private equity and those kind of things and franchises to know that if they failed, the franchisor would take it back. Sure. And they would likely sell it to another franchisee.
To try to turn it around or make it work.
Yeah. So I just thought, you know what? When they shut it down, and I thought, I'm just going to stick around and I'll just keep running it, not getting paid, and see what happens. And eventually it got bought by private equity. Wow. And they showed up and they were like, what are you doing here? Who are you, kid? And I'm like, I'm the guy that's been running the thing. And they're like, you want to just keep running it? And the next thing I know, I was a general manager for them. We ended up buying a bunch of franchises, turning them around. And then I just really got a reputation for that, for this I think a lot of fixers in the investment world are hatchet men. They come in and that's all they can think about is what do I need to cut? For me, it was a little different. A lot of these businesses, I was happy to jump in the truck with the guys.
Right.
And go ride around for a day and say, what's going on? And get their trust. And I would say about 8 times out of 10, about day 2, they tell you something and you're like, that's it.
Yeah.
That is the whole problem in this business.
It's interesting that you bring that up. So I was having a conversation, this was a couple of months ago, with Ken Goodrich. I don't know if you know Ken.
I think I do. I think I've met him for you.
From Gettle.
Yeah.
So we were having this conversation about some of the different things that he's doing, and he's brilliant, super brilliant. And we were having a similar conversation about a hatchet man or somebody that invests the time into turning something around or making it work. And, he was just communicating this story of, having really great people that are able to work with others, identify what the process problem is, and spending the time to fix it is really valuable because, in full transparency, he just kind of exposed a weakness of his. He said, if it were up to me, I would just come in, burn it to the ground, and start from fresh. Yeah. Because that's easier for me, and I don't have the time to devote to taking
and it does take time. I mean, that is the difference, is you can slash and burn and try to rebuild from the ashes. My firm belief is that probably the majority... Let me pivot a little bit here to think about data. We talk a lot about data anymore. Everybody's into data, and they're like, I need dashboards. Like, everybody wants a dashboard. They all want data. But really what we want is insights. And when we roll data up into a dashboard, the only real insights we can get are macro insights on that. When we are there at the point of data being generated, and we can talk to the guy swinging the hammer, and we can say, well, why did that happen? And they go, oh, well, because of this. That's the real insights I want. Yeah. Because I want the insight before it becomes a macro problem. I want that little thing on the front line that somebody says, a great story a few years back. There was a company we did some work with, and they were talking about, they were construction guys, and we were asking them, we're like, what is the biggest challenge you have? And they said, oh, it's the tool problem. And we said, well, what is the tool problem? And they said, well, for our 6-man crew, we only have one set of tools. So most of the day we stand around and do nothing, waiting on tools.
That's an issue.
Yeah, and we're like, did you make a requisition request? Yes, we have made for 6 quarters in a row. Wow. We've asked for the tools, but it keeps being rejected because the company is trying to improve their margins. And our boss is incentivized to keep expenses down. Sure. So unfortunately, we stand around most of the day at work and smoke cigarettes.
That just makes zero sense.
Right. And we're like, do you want to do that? They're like, no, we got into working with our hands and doing this kind of work.
Because we want to.
Because we like to do this kind of work. It's like healthcare people is the same thing. They're not, people that do these kind of things like to build things. Yeah. So giving them the tools to help them to build things more efficiently and faster makes complete total sense, but many times the rules stand in the way. Yeah. We have a goal. Okay, we have a goal. Well, whoopee. Like, if the goal is standing in the way of progress, then we need to be able to throw that goal out and try something else. So I think that's what I've always been good at, is getting to the root core of the problem, understanding what it is, and then being able to fix that thing, which is not the big expensive fix. Sure. It's the little tiny tweak over here that, if you've ever done any sort of bow and arrow or shooting, right? I mean, the difference of a 1/4 inch here is missing the target completely down there.
Absolutely.
And so many times we want dashboards that show us how we did on the target. No, I want the insights that came from the moment that the trigger was pulled that says, aha, if we were to do this, we would have done significantly better down there. Make work easier is really what I'm all about.
So this is a cool thought because, given into consideration who our audience is, there's a ripple effect that happens, right? And I know we're talking about the business and we're talking about how that impacts the business and the targets, but I mean, if we unwind that, there's a significant impact, in our case, to a homeowner.
Absolutely.
And if, in this example you gave, if we've got 6 workers at a construction company that are standing around, that customer that is waiting to get their project done, now the timelines get shifted and it gets bumped and there's aggravation and there's friction. And so I think that from a consumer standpoint, if they're a homeowner and they're doing business with a company that's got tight processes and systems and they've gone through this exercise, now that whole experience for them is better too. Am I right?
No, it's really true. And I think when we were together last, we were talking about a process map, and I don't know if it was this one or not, but there's one that we have in our database where the company is saying we want to reduce callbacks to under 2% because we're getting way too many callbacks after we leave the job and did the work when the client's calling and going, this is not right. You need to come back out here. And it was really hurting them. So they tried all sorts of things. They got dashboards. They're using AI. They're using all of these things. We go out to the guys, the actual guys in the trucks, and we're like, what's happening? Well, 40% of the time there's been a change order, never been communicated to us. So I'm on the job doing the job. And I get back to the office and match the paperwork, and I'm like, that's not the work that I did. I did something totally different.
So, of course, they have to rework it.
Of course, it's going to be rework. 25% of the time I show up at the job site, I don't have the right materials.
Jeez.
50% of the time, we don't have enough labor. I got to get an air conditioning up onto the roof. I got to get shingles up the ladder, and it's me.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a helper. All of these little things that break down the process. And I've learned this working in manufacturing over the years that, keeping people fresh throughout the day is really important. This idea of hustle culture, I hate it because I think hustle is an indication that you're a really poor leader. No offense to anybody that has that hustle sign in their office.
Yeah.
But what I really want is I want people to be able to consistently produce a repeatable result that I can trust and I know it's going to be done right. And I want them to be able to do it in a way that we can still make profit.
Yeah.
So, asking somebody to carry all the shingles up and down the ladder themselves and then install them means that by the time they get the shingles to the roof, they're going to do a poor job. There's just no way around it. They're too tired at that point to do it. I've seen this with manufacturing as well, as people are like, we want them to hustle, we want them to hustle. And then they have a whole bunch of young people working there.
Right.
They don't have anybody experienced working there. And I'm like, because the experienced guy looks at that and goes, no, I know I have to pace myself.
Right.
And we think as owners, we don't want people to do that. We're like, no, we want them to really go, go, go. No, I want consistent results from the process.
Yeah.
If that means that Joe has to be able to piece it out and say, here's the pace that I work at. I hang 3 sheets of drywall an hour because when I hang 3, they're always perfect.
They're perfect.
There's no rework. I don't have to turn it. When I hang 4, it goes out the window. Right?
Yeah.
And I have to speed up. We've all done this. When you have to do something more quickly, you do it poorly.
Of course you do. You can't spend the time that you need to do it right.
So doing the job right is a really important thing with me. I am a firm. There's only 3 reasons that people work. They work for fear, finance, or because they want to. I really would prefer to have people on my job sites that want to actually be there. I don't know if you saw the Reddit. It was wild, like 3 days ago, about this drywaller. Have you seen this?
No.
Oh my goodness. It's like becoming a legend on
Really?
the Reddit website. Yeah, what happened is this lady had a general contractor come in and do some work, and they sent in this drywaller, and he was super obnoxious and swearing, and her kids were there and stuff, and she called the GC and she said, please don't send him back. So the next day, she comes home from work, and this guy's there. And she is upset, and she rolls back the camera and sees that instead of water to make up the mix, he's urinating.
Are you kidding me?
No. And she has it on camera. And she's like, okay.
Okay, how can that not go viral?
Yeah. So, this thing is really blown up. And then the general contractor, she's like, well, I want you to tear the whole kitchen out.
Sure.
Now. She's like, I don't know what he did. And he's like, well, it was just a one-time thing.
Wow, but you don't know that.
Yeah. And then she's like, well, he's like, what if we spray down with bleach? She's like, no. You got to. So I want people that want to be there.
Yeah.
And the people that want to be there, they're the highly skilled people that take joy in the work. They have pride in their workmanship. So that means I have to, as a business in this industry in particular, because there are a lot of people in the construction industry that are peeing in a bucket, right?
Yeah, you don't want them working on your jobs.
You don't want them working on your jobs.
That's right.
So I want the right people. And I have to understand sometimes that the right people aren't going to be doing it the most quickly they can possibly. We have a guy that does towel for us. He is the slowest towel guy I've ever met. It is so perfect, though.
Yeah.
We've hired other people at times to do things at some of our rentals and things, and I'm like, why did I not call Arturo?
Yeah.
Because Arturo, he would have been there an extra 3 days.
Well, you know what? You know what the interesting thing is I really think it's a lens thing, right? As business leaders or owners, we think we want a hustle culture.
Yeah.
But really what we want is the results that come from what we think a hustle culture is. But the reality is it's more of an efficiency culture.
It really is.
We want efficient work that's done right. The hustle doesn't mean anything if we got to redo it twice. Because now that hustle turned into twice as much time anyway.
It really does. And I think, I talk about this a lot in talks that I give with executive groups that, we spend a lot of time waiting, looking, and checking in business.
Yeah.
It's about 25% of administration in business is waiting, looking, and checking. And there are times that I need to inspect the work. But if I have to inspect it 4 times, all that means is I don't trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't trust the process, it is impossible for me to trust the people.
Yeah.
Because I know that they aren't going to produce a consistent result every single time. And when you're working in an environment like construction, the best thing you want is consistency.
Yeah.
I want to send a crew out to a job that's pouring concrete that if I do show up, there's never anything that because I'm just like, I know those guys were going to do it right.
Yeah.
I knew they were given enough time. I don't like to rush them. I mean, I hate rush orders in general, particularly in manufacturing, because I've seen how rush orders in manufacturing, time and time again, somebody will say, well, this has to go to the front of the line. And the next thing you know, it took 3 times longer to do everything because we hurried up this one thing. If you consistently know what your process produces and how it produces it and when it produces it, and, in Japan, I don't know if you've ever been to Japan. I have not, but I'm a big fan of Japanese management.
I've got a cousin who lives there, and he loves it from that perspective.
Yeah, it's very efficient.
Yeah.
Right? That you can literally, it is better to set your clock from a train because they're to the fraction of a second trains come into the station. I mean, they are, there's been wild stories if you read anything about Japanese culture. There was a problem with some trains about a couple of years ago in Japan, and the train was 8 seconds late. And the executives of the company did a press conference, and they were like, we need to apologize to the people of Japan.
Jeez.
Like, we were 8 seconds late in this train, and it will never happen again.
What a culture.
Right, what a culture. Yeah. But consistently producing results means that you don't have to spend it. You cannot inspect for quality.
Right.
You have to build in quality. And then at the end, you look at it and you go, that's what quality looks like. If I have to inspect for quality, it means I didn't do it right the first time.
Yeah.
And then I inspected and I got a little bit better. And then we inspected again and we inspected again and we inspected again. That's not efficient. It's not cost effective. And candidly, I don't believe that people want to deliver. Of all of the years I've been doing this work, I've probably met 4 or 5 people that didn't want to do a good job. Like, that just as a human being, were like, I want to do it. Probably the guy peeing in the bucket. Right? Yeah, the peeing in the bucket guy.
Yep.
But most people want to do a good job. They want to go home to their wife and kids and say, I killed it today.
I knocked it out of the park.
Knocked it out of the park. Everybody wants that pride and joy. So creating a system that allows people to have that, I think, is really powerful. And I got to, not giving you a testimonial, but the conversations I've had with you and with Vaughn and talking to you all about your business, you think that way.
No, we appreciate that.
It's really true. The fact that we had a great conversation here last week where you all are like, look, we're doing great. How do we do better than great?
Yeah.
And then once we get it there, how do we do better than that? There's an old story in Japan. I was talking about Japan about the Toyota company.
Yep.
So in 1939, before they were a car manufacturer, they made looms. And they were the leader in the electric loom business. They would make all of these custom electric looms to do, to do sewing and those kind of things. And in 1939, they were so far ahead of their competitors that thieves broke into the Toyota factory and stole the blueprints on their most recent model, the model that was really hurting everybody. And the police came in, and the police found evidence that it was a competitor that stole these plans. And they wrote everything up. They got all the evidence together. They did their investigation. They went to the CEO of Toyota and they said, we need you to sign this statement that you want to press charges. And he said, well, absolutely not. Like, why would I press charges on them? They're like, yeah, well, they stole all of your intellectual property about this. And he said, oh, but what you don't understand is that it's going to take them 6 months to build that. By the time they build that, what we'll be building is so much better than that. He's like, I feel bad for them. That's the crap they're going to be produced. What we produce today as high quality will be garbage in 6 months.
Right.
Because that's just the way we think. And that story, I think, is so powerful for a CEO to hear, to go, wait a second. We can get better. We can always get better. And if we have a system to get better, we don't even care if a competitor comes in. Because we're like, I feel bad that they're stealing our ideas today. What they really need to steal is our ideas tomorrow.
You know what's interesting? I was just having this conversation with another mentor, and we were talking through, even for our company, where TraVek is at today. Yeah. And TraVek has done an awesome job of getting to where they are today. We're profitable, we're growing, we've got a great team. But the conversation I was having with this mentor was process-wise and systems-wise, what worked to get TraVek where we are today is
won't
not
work.
necessarily the answer to get TraVek where TraVek wants to go in the future. And so we were having a similar conversation of, well, we got to look at our systems and we have to look at our processes and we have to look how we can turn the knob just a little bit because what worked yesterday isn't going to work for getting us where we want to go.
No, and I think this is not only true of process, it is also true of our ideology about business. Because the ideology that you and I have about our business comes from two sources. Comes from a guy who died in 1915 called Taylor, who created Taylorism, the idea of scientific management, of measuring inputs and outputs of businesses. So that's an over 100-year-old idea, and it's a good idea.
Sure.
Taylor had two ideas. The second one was not so great, and we still use that one today. The second idea he had is scientific management. We need to be able to statistically control process. His second idea was, let's pay people for piecework. Let's pay people based upon their performance in the workplace. We still do that to this day, but it didn't work. Actually, Taylor tried it and it never really worked. But the perfect example of this is in 1920, the New York City School District was so influenced by Taylor's ideas about rewarding individual performance that they changed the rules in the New York City schools, and they said children that are the highest performers in their class will get candy and toys. And they created this like system for kids to get paid for all of these kind of things. Remember Pizza Hut did this?
Sure.
No, did you grow up here?
No, I grew up in Southern Oregon.
Okay. But you remember Pizza Hut, right?
Thing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. You read a book.
I was reading books like crazy because I wanted to get free personal pan pizzas.
So this seemed like it's a good idea. But what New York City found, what they found in the schools was that by 1923, the whole city was outraged. And they said, look, you have created a class of children that have a mercenary spirit to the point they will do anything to win, including sabotaging other students.
And potentially cheating and all of these other things. Right.
So literally the parents came to the school board and were like, this idea is terrible. Don't ever use it again.
Interesting.
And we still use it to this day as a method that has been proven that it doesn't really work. The other person that really influenced us is Drucker, right? Drucker came up in 1954 and said management by objective. Let's create a goal for the company. Let's break that down into individual goals. Let's measure the performance of individuals, and we will dole out rewards or consequences based upon these things. Those are the ideas that we are using in our management to this day.
Yeah.
One idea is over 100 years old. The other idea is about 75 years old, his list of ideas. But we have 21st century technology, and we're technically running businesses with 19th century and early 20th century ideas.
Right.
Maybe our ideas actually are going to need to evolve as well.
Sure.
Not just our process, but the way that we think about our organizations and the way that we think about work and the way that we think about business. And that's really what I'm very passionate about. It's not just about process in general, it is about being able to advance or retreat on your position based upon new information. It's critical thinking.
Well, and that's hard to do.
Sure.
Like, and if you, and I'm sure some of our audience feels this way, right?
Yeah.
As a business owner or an executive leader, I would be lying if I said I didn't have this in me either, but there's a bit of pride there where it feels like, well, it's hard to swallow that pill and say, maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way.
Totally.
And maybe I need to take a step back from what I've always done that's always worked and think there's a better way or there's a different way that might get better results.
And I think there have been experiments that have been done that unfortunately, because of the way society is designed, didn't pan out. Like the DuPont method in the 1950s and 60s was fascinating. DuPont discovered by doing all sorts of experiments with employees, they found that the optimal work is this. You work 5 10-hour days for 3 weeks. Then you get 1 week off every single month. And DuPont found significantly higher employee performance, almost no safety accidents, nobody called in sick, nobody needed to go to a dentist appointment on a Thursday afternoon or Friday, nobody called in on Monday morning, right? People actually knew, by knowing that they had 1 week vacation every single month, and they would stack it up into 9 days. Or actually, it was leaving. So you would get the Friday, Saturday, then you'd get the whole week. So you'd have this 9-day break every single month. And they found that there were some stories in the 60s where DuPont would put out an ad that they needed to hire one person and have 3,000 people show up and be like,
I'm sure.
They got the best talent. because everybody was like, this is a great place to work. I get 12 weeks off a year. Now, unfortunately, the labor department said, well, anything over 40, you got to pay overtime on.
Right.
And eventually DuPont just said, we're just going to give up.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. But maybe there's other models too to think about the way people work.
Yep. Yeah. And that's, I mean, you think about everything that's out there right now in technology, and we've got this culture that work from home or work remote, or there's all these different schools of thought on whether that works or doesn't work. And so I think that in general, we're starting to dip our toes into different areas on what might work and what might not work. But I don't know that anybody's landed on something as a...
And I think you have a challenge with remote work. We do some remote work at my place too. It's really difficult to always be remote because we have to remember something as a species, just from pure evolutionary biology. Let's just call it 300,000 years. We've been evolving into what we are. 299, 999, of those, all of our interaction was together.
Yep.
And for 4, it's been via Zoom.
Right.
I wonder if that's why we have so much anxiety. I wonder if that's why there's so much dissatisfaction. I wonder if that's why so much polarization in society, because we're not getting into rooms and having shoulder friction anymore.
There are so many thoughts and hypotheticals that we could come up with around it. But I mean, I think that we'll see pretty quick there's a need for that. That human connection is real. Yeah. And like you said, it's been around for as long as we've existed,
Simon Sinek talked about it recently on one of his podcasts, that emotional bonding in human beings, if you get into scanning the human mind and making emotional connections, smell is the number one sense.
That's unreal.
That makes emotional connections. And it's not body odor, it's pheromones, right?
Yeah.
It's being able to pick up on, and some people call it aura or energy or whatever it is. Whatever you want to think about that. The reality is, we are animals, and we are putting off these pheromones all the time. Yeah. And some of them are fear. I mean, there was a recent study that was about this concept called limbic resonance, and I mentioned it in my last book, Adaptagility, that says that the human beings, our limbic systems, our fight or flight mechanism, sync together when we're in groups. And this now explains that mob mentality.
Of course.
It explains why people get violent in larger groups, because all it takes is one person to get violent. Yeah. And for some reason, our biology starts to say, wait, there's a threat. What's going on? Like, we're heard in that regard. Yeah. And it's funny because we look at animals separately from ourselves, but we have to remember we have
there's some characteristics there
in there that we have to say. So I think, unfortunately, and this plays perfectly into what you all do, and if you're a homeowner or a contractor or a business owner, the reality is we need to design our world, because everything in our world only comes from 2 sources: evolution and mutation, or intelligent design. Yeah. I prefer to be the designer of my world.
Absolutely.
I prefer to make my own process. I prefer to be the master over the processes in my business. If I am not, then evolution and mutation are in there. And if evolution and mutation are in there, although it produces a pretty good result eventually, the way it produces result is wild variation.
It's a different path.
All over the place, right? So that diversity. Diversity is great in culture. Diversity is not great in producing a result for your customer where every time it
not a consistent result.
Yeah, you got to produce consistency.
Yeah, so one of the things that I communicate to my sales team, and that's been my career, is helping salespeople really understand how they can be more successful. But one of the things that I coach them on is I have them go through this exercise of identifying what their can column is and their can't, meaning what can you control and what can't you control. And to that same point, if you are the designer and you understand, here are the things that I can control, and I'm going to be remarkable at designing a way to every single time controlling the things I know I can control and not wasting my time with everything that's outside of my control, I'm going to be successful.
Absolutely.
Because I've designed the roadmap to be successful on things I can control. Yeah. If you focus all of your time on the weather and the elections and all the things that are out of your control, you have no time left for the things you can control, and you're letting the world drive the result, and nobody's ever going to be successful when you just let something that you can't control to drive the results.
This is a great setup, and it goes back to the early part of this conversation when I mentioned Taylor. So Taylor's concepts around scientific management all were based really on one thing, and that is a simple XY axis on a piece of paper where time is written at the bottom and whatever you want to track is over here. And then you just keep looking at it. Okay, how did we produce our result over and over and over? You drop those bubbles and you put a question mark beside the things that are outside the range, and then you determine, is this within my control or isn't it? Because if it's not, I can't include it in my average.
Right.
If it is, Well, do I just need to do more of that? Oh, I had a client years ago. This is a wild one. We were doing these statistical control charts, and we had this massive bump in sales one month. I mean, massive, like 300% increase.
Jeez.
And the CEO's like buying Cristal. He's like, we're doing this whole party. And I'm like, Chris, why?
Why did this happen?
Why did it happen? And he's like, I don't care. It's great. I'm like, but we need to understand why. So we started going back and tracking, and we found a very odd anomaly. And that was, you would never think that the causation and the correlation were this. But 6 months before, he was in between CFOs. And the CFO that he had for years refused to let their sales reps expense more than $20 on a client lunch. Well, this was 10 years ago, so that's like $50 today. The CFO that they had now also kept that policy. But in the interim, they got a fractional guy. Yeah, this fractional guy whose brother had this really great steakhouse in town. And this guy was like, look, I feel like if we started taking prospects to this really great steakhouse, and since my brother owns it, when you walk in, the concierge is going to be like, oh, we know who you are. Let us take you to your table and let's have this experience. And when we tracked it back, wouldn't you know, all those sales increases were from when we were buying that $150 lunch.
But something that simple.
That simple. But the customer looked at that, and everybody else in town, with those CFOs, and this is the small town back east, I'm sure those CFOs worked between all those agencies, right? And they were all saying, oh, you don't want to spend any money on this, you don't want to spend. But this one anomaly just radically changed the whole organization. So immediately, their CEO is like, spend money, wine and dine everybody, right?
Yeah.
Which made it easier for the salespeople.
Of course.
It's a whole lot easier to call a prospect and be like, hey, you want to go to McDonald's? They're like, nah. When you're like, hey, you know that new steakhouse in town that you can't get a reservation at? I have a table there.
I'm on the list.
You want to go?
It's a standing.
All right, I'm coming, right? So just thinking about that and understanding that there are things that happen really early in the process. It happens where the hammer is being swung. It happens in the management, happens in the estimation that will actually either set that project up for success or for failure.
Yeah.
And we need to know what those things are. Is it in our control? $150 lunches are in our control.
Yeah.
I'm sure your salespeople are going to hear this and be like,
yeah, I mean, they're going to be pounding
we're
on the
already
door,
in Scottsdale. Yeah, we're already in Scottsdale. So it's like $1,100 lunch in Scottsdale. But no, I mean, we have to figure out what those little things are. Because there are these little levers. We all think about the big levers. There are little levers that actually will get you bigger leverage than the big levers.
Yeah.
So finding out what those are is important.
One cool thing about this, and this is just kind of a thought that I'm having as we're talking, every aspect of business, like this is so replicable and it's so scalable within a business. Like every activity, every role, everything can be blueprinted and designed
Absolutely.
to have the highest efficiency. And obviously, you're in business for a reason.
Yeah,
right? Because you're the guy that can come in and say, hey, let's look at everything.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help you understand where the miss here is and how we correct it.
I think a lot of the misconception about process, and I'm really big on mapping. I believe you have to be able to visualize the business to really control it. You can't fix what you can't see.
Yeah.
How do you know what steps are in what order if you don't know what steps are in what order? And then, as I mentioned with this little statistical control chart idea, it's like I need to know what that process is capable of doing. How many sheets of drywall per day can be hung by a drywall guy?
Right.
What is it? What is the average over time? Does that change when the temperature changes? Because if it's at 120 degrees and he can only do 60% of the drywall, well, then I have to rethink my manpower forecasting. I have to think all these things. So understanding that and using these little statistical control charts. Every time I work inside of a business, I teach people how to do this.
Yeah.
And they'll come to me and they'll be like, hey, I've been tracking the number of phone on our leads on our web. Do you know about 2 weeks ago something weird happened? I'm like, what happened? They're like, this. And I did some investigation. And did you know that we ran this ad versus this ad? And I think this one's okay. Let's do another experiment, right?
Welcome to A/B testing and ROI.
But we don't A/B test in process.
Right.
See, process, unfortunately, is something that executives have looked at as a one-time thing that you do, and then you put it into the 3-ring binder.
You set it and forget it.
And you find, do you have a file cabinet anywhere? Probably not many. There's
there.
still one back there.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you that's where, people shove them in there. And then when we do need it, we have to do an Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
It's like, we got to go find it and we're blowing the dust off and we're looking through it. I had a situation years ago. I haven't talked about this in years, but it was wild. We worked with a company that had a big customer service department, about 16 people. And they had been around for about 40 years. And I was watching the process, and it seemed really manual. So I went onto their website and I filled out one of the forms and I sent it into them. And I went over to the customer service head and I said, how does this all work? And she said, I sent this form. I'm sure you got it as an email. And she said, no, it doesn't work that way here. I'm like, oh, well, how does it work? And she's like, over on that printer, all of the emails print out on the printer.
Wow.
Like, okay, so she goes over and takes it and she looks at it, she goes, oh, you're looking for an estimate. So then she rolls it up and she puts it in like a mail slot for their estimator. Yeah.
Like a scroll.
Yeah, like a scroll. And then the estimator gets it, and then he writes on it all the information, and then he puts it back in there in her inbox. Then she takes it, and there's 16 people doing this. Then she takes it, she types a fresh email out to the customer, and retypes everything and sends it back to the customer. So she does this with me standing there,
right?
And I reply back. And I said, did you get the reply? And she said, oh, no.
You printed off on the
printer.
Oh, my God.
So we went, and these guys had been a franchise years ago, and they were really big on following procedure. So we found the process map and the SOP on this. And we found something very interesting. At the top of it, it said, process for taking email inquiries. And there was whiteout over the email word. So we scratched it off and it said process for fax. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when
was the only way
email came in, they just put whiteout over it.
Wow.
And just followed the process religiously.
Yeah, but how many businesses are like that, though? How many businesses, not that extreme, but
they usually are
the same
they're
process.
Usually that extreme, though, too. That's the crazy part, is there's so many times where it's like, we have something that's efficient, or it's sufficient, but it's not efficient.
Yeah.
Or we don't audit process. I mean, AI is a big thing right now. It wasn't a thing 2 years ago. So if you haven't process mapped your business in the last 2 years, and you're using new technologies, I guarantee those process maps don't reflect what you're doing. Yeah. We had a client 2 days ago, a trucking company, and here in the Valley, and we did a process map for them. And I went in for the 30-day meeting with them. And we were like, here's the maps. We printed everything out. We took it all in. We put it up against the wall. And the lady immediately, she says, all that's irrelevant. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, as soon as we saw it on the wall, she goes, can I take a black marker up there? 80% of the steps.
Wow.
She's like, automated this, realized we didn't need to use this system, changed it over to here, move the role of this person. She literally went through the whole entire thing. So the CEO comes in the room and he's like, how did it work with our process mapping exercise? I'm like, we have to throw it all away. We start all over again. He's like, what do you mean you got to start all over again? I'm like, we fixed everything. Like, she fixed everything in 30 days.
Wow.
I'm like, this is not I have to invest more money. This is like, yes, please.
Right.
How do we do more of that?
Yeah.
But she's like, I read through the manual and it made sense. She's like, as soon as you put it up on the wall, I was like, what are we, idiots? Like, why in the world would we do these things in this order?
Well, but you need somebody like that in the organization that can see it and that is brave enough to be able to critically think. Yeah.
I think that is a challenge that we have in Western management as well, is that we do fire people. That is not a thing in the Japanese culture. They don't fire people. Yeah. For many years, I don't know if it's still the case, but when you got a job in Japan, you were guaranteed lifetime employment up until your point of retirement. And to that point, even in the manufacturing world, they used to have in their contracts with people that says, if you come up with ideas that replace your job, the company will continue to pay you as a reward for you figuring out how to make yourself obsolete.
Yeah.
Now, the company might expand at that point and call you back in and be like, do it again. But think about that. If your people have the ability to earn the right to not go to work but still get paid. It's just a mindset that's completely
beyond the mindset that we can even wrap our arms around here.
But it is something to think about, right?
Absolutely.
It is about dissecting. I do really believe that it is very difficult to navigate anything without some visual.
Yeah.
And when you can break this down into pieces and you can start to understand the relationship between things, you can start to see the cause and effect. You can start to see how one little problem here creates a huge problem down here. Very quickly, the people involved in that process, because they are in pain, want to improve it. I had somebody one time, I was saying, why do you think the team is so excited about making these improvements? And they said, well, it's like every day they get punched in the face 3 times. Now we're suggesting that they only get punched in the face once and maybe none.
How exciting.
We'll help with that process. So we've built systems that aren't user-friendly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to think about. How do we make something that's user-friendly to the customer? It's user-friendly to the people that work there. It's user-friendly to the vendors. I've seen some really progressive companies, even one of the companies that I recently bought, they actually, for years, would go to all their subcontractors and say, we will pay consultants to do process improvement at your business for you.
For you.
You don't have to pay for it. We'll pay for it. Why? Because if my subcontractor is significantly more efficient and his costs go down, and like we're all sharing, so now I know your costs are down 20%.
Yep.
So when it comes time when I need a favor and I'm like, hey, I got to get this job done, you feel like
20% could maybe come back around.
Yeah, it can come back around a little bit.
Yep.
So what an incredible way to think about your business, though. Is like, let's not just optimize our business. Let's optimize the business of our subcontractors so that our subcontractors are better. I mean, here in the U.S., the American auto industry has like 6,000 vendors. In Japan, there's less than 100.
Jeez.
Because they just work very closely with their vendors.
Right. Right. Interesting. Well, Derek, this has been so awesome.
Yeah, and that was fast. I mean, we got there.
We cruised through a lot. I feel like you and I could spend the whole day in this room and just still have great content.
Thanks for having me. This is
fun. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
And you guys really appreciate you being willing to always listen to us. And, we bring people on the show that are much smarter than I am. And I get to learn, you guys get to learn. And so hopefully it's valuable. If it's a business owner and they're looking to maybe get a little more in-depth information on who you are and what you do, how do they find you?
Theprocessfixer.com.
Okay.
That's what we do. And we do training around this. We do discovery around this. A lot of the work that we do anymore is training people inside companies to do the work.
Awesome.
Because it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's like, as a consultant, sure, I want a client that's just going to pay me forever and ever and ever. That's not really fair.
Yeah, it's not fair or realistic.
Let me teach them how to do it. Let's teach them how to fish and then go out and find those issues for yourself.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, you heard it from him, theprocessfixer.com. Again, so glad you were able to come.
Thanks for having me.
Make time to be on here. And for all of you, thank you again for always watching and listening. Until next week, join us for Before the Hammer Strikes and have an awesome weekend.